Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Cook, and I'm head of the Environment Programme at the UN Global Compact Network UK. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the third session of our four-part Nature-Based Solutions for Business webinar series, kindly supported by our member, One Carbon World. So before we dive into the content, those of you that have been to a few of these know we have a bit of housekeeping to cover. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you and made available on our website, along with key takeaways. We have activated automatic captions, which you can choose to accept in the tools bar. They are generated automatically by Zoom, so as always, please forgive any typos or mistakes that are made in the programme. We are in webinar mode, so that means all of you attendees will be muted and not visible on screen throughout the session, but of course, we always want to hear from you, so please do introduce yourselves in the chat, tell us where you're from. You can also use the chat to tell us about any technical issues. But we will have plenty of time for a live Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's session. If you have a question you'd like to ask our experts, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And you can also use the upvote function. So even if you don't have a question, but you want to prioritize something that you'd like us to answer, please use that, because we do try to answer them as democratically as we can. So next slide, please. So with conflict raging in Gaza, Ukraine, and many other regions of the world, we'd like to take this opportunity to remind you of the UN Global Compact human rights principles and urge you to ensure that your company is not complicit in human rights abuses through your direct operations or your supply chain. If you or your company are able to support UN agencies bringing relief to people in need, please do take a look at the links that will be shared in the chat. And now, I'd just like to take a moment to introduce the UN Global Compact and the UK network, if this is your first event with us. The UN Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, with over 25,000 global participants who have made a CEO commitment to uphold our 10 principles. These universal principles are derived from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labour, environment, and anti-corruption, and represent a blueprint for sustainable business. Here at the UK network, our mission is to turn this global momentum on sustainability into practical action. And we have three main work streams: environment, social, and governance. And we host more than 100 events a year, including working groups and accelerator programs, to support both our members and the wider business community here in the UK. So if you're not already a member of the UN Global Compact and you're curious, then we would love you to consider joining, and you can find more information on how to join through the link in the chat. So a key part of our mission is to drive business engagement with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we would just like to flag that today's session is especially linked to goals 13, 14, 15, and 17. And now on to why we're all here today. So we've developed this series to provide practical guidance on how companies can choose, implement, and finance a range of nature-based solutions in line with their commercial and sustainability priorities, and with the principles underpinning the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. In our first session, we kicked off the series with a webinar focusing on land-based solutions. We covered the business case for implementing and investing in NBS, and heard from leading companies such as Scottish Power Renewables and Reckitt, and how they are incorporating solutions like peatland restoration techniques and regenerative agriculture to sequester carbon, address their impacts on nature, and regenerate critical landscapes. We also heard from a representative from the IUCN on the principles that companies should look to align with as part of designing and implementing NBS, to ensure that they are sustainable and deliver both environmental and societal benefits. So if you miss a session and want to catch up on the recording, then you can do so by following the link that Justin is posting in the chat. In the second session last Tuesday, we took a deep dive into urban solutions and explored examples of nature-based solutions that businesses can incorporate into their built environment, either as part of developing a new build, retrofitting an existing building, or for those businesses operating in rented spaces that might not be able to implement NBS, such as green walls or roofs. We looked at examples of solutions that they can invest in to enhance the resilience of urban environments. It was a fascinating session, and again, you can access the recording of that via the link in the chat. So we have today's webinar and then a final one looking at how the private sector can contribute towards closing the finance gap so that nature-based solutions can be deployed at scale. So if you haven't already, then please do register for all the sessions by clicking on the link in the chat. So now today's session is focused on freshwater and ocean-based solutions. And we'll be hearing examples of how businesses and leading NGOs have implemented and maintained a range of NBS to help restore marine and freshwater ecosystems, advance their sustainability and commercial goals, and safeguard the quality and supply of water. And we have a fantastic panel of speakers lined up to bring these examples to life. We're joined by Marieke, Nieuwaal, technical principal for nature-based solutions at MacDonald. We have Michael Copleston, England director at RSPB, and Samir Whitaker, biodiversity lead specialist at Ørsted. So with that, I'm delighted to hand over to Marieke to kick us off with a bit of an introduction into freshwater NBS and how MacDonald is working with partners to overcome some of the barriers to scaling freshwater NBS in the UK. So Marieke, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and to see so much interest in this topic. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Marieke Nieuwaal. I'm a global lead for nature-based solutions at MacDonald and really passionate about nature-based solutions and bringing them or making them work at scale. Today, I'll set the scene for this session about nature-based solutions for business, ocean-based and freshwater solutions. And then I'll talk more about a program that I'm working on. And it's a national collaboration program on mainstreaming nature-based solutions to deliver greater value. So on the next slide, I just wanted to start with a reminder of the definitions that we use for nature-based solutions by IUCN. So it's sort of measures that work with natures to address societal challenges, providing benefits for human well-being as well as biodiversity. And on the next slide, I've got our website that we have, which shows an interactive map where you can explore some key nature-based solutions approaches with benefits and case studies. So if you want to have a look, that would be great. And yeah, let me know what you think about it. And then on the next slide, the nature-based solutions, they cover quite a wide range of interventions, approaches and techniques, like the one we are shown on the screen. And today we'll focus on freshwater nature-based solutions, including restoring rivers and wetlands, as well as ocean-based nature-based solutions such as mangrove, seagrass, kelp, forest, etc. Then there are a number of drivers for businesses on the next slide to implement or maintain these types of nature-based solutions, like advance sustainability goals, so deliver sustainability action on climate, biodiversity or nature positive goals, or align with reporting rules such as TNFD or ISSB. And then manage and mitigate risks, so safeguarding quality or water or supply of water, and also building resilience of key supply chains against floods and droughts. Then improve business performance, for example, improve raw materials entering the supply chain or reduce cost. Meet regulatory requirements. In the UK, there are a number of legal deadlines that have passed on in regulations, so like restoring water to good health by 2027, or for 30% of land and sea to be protected for nature's recovery, and to halt the decline of species by 2030. And finally, unlock wider benefits. Because the key thing about nature-based solutions is they can have multiple co-benefits. And on the next slide, we have tried to capture the potential benefits of nature-based solutions. So for example, if you're looking to improve river water quality by putting in a range of sediment traps, wetlands, ponds, buffer strips, riverside woodland, you would also reduce runoff and flooding problems. And you would keep the soil on the land, so maybe a farm business is more sustainable, create a great place for nature or for people to explore, play and learn about their natural world. There are, of course, many examples. But of course, this all sounds great. It has been proven to be challenging to realize nature-based solutions efficiently at scale. On the next slide, so for the UK water sector, the UK government recognises the value of nature-based solutions, and through the regulator Ofwat expects a significant increase in the use of nature and catchment-based solutions by water companies. So of their 88 billion investment programme that looks to be approved for the next investment period, which would be 2025 to 2030, 2 billion is earmarked for nature-based solutions, pounds, that is. So that is a bit less than hoped. And moreover, the feeling is that it will be actually quite hard to realize this because of many barriers related to cost, evidence, and regulation. Nature-based solutions don't fit into the systems, processes, and ways of working that were designed for grey solution, and change is needed. So I'm working on a program aiming to, sorry, can you go to the next slide, to enable, and another one, the change, to enable this change needed. It's called the Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions to Create Greater Value program, and it's funded by the Ofwat Innovation Fund. This is a national collaboration program with 22 named partners, aiming to overcome barriers and find enablers to mainstream nature-based solutions at landscape scale. United Utilities is lead partner, the Rivers Trust, Jacobs, North Star Transition, Mott, MacDonald, and Arab are core partners, and there's a range of other partners and and other collaborators. It's initiated by the water sector, but it's aiming to work across different sectors and consider nature-based solutions really at landscape scale. On the next slide, there are the barriers that we're focusing on under this program. So there's uncertainty around implementation, maintenance, effectiveness, and valuation of nature-based solutions. Then there's the siloed ways of working, which doesn't help with collaboration. That's often needed for nature-based solutions. And there's a lot of complexities around risk and ownership. Then unsupportive and complex regulatory environments, and finally, limited financial initiatives to attract investment and revenue streams at scale. So enablers, if you click once more, to overcome these barriers that we will include are partnership working, policy and regulation, standardization, joined up planning, and systematic knowledge sharing. Then on the next slide. So it's a 5-year national program of work. So it started end of last year and it's until 2028. And it secured 8.9 million through the Ofwat Innovation Fund. And program outcomes are so greater adoption and transition of nature-based solutions into business as usual and maximizing their benefits. So this would be achieved through co-creating standardized tools and processes, a common way of fairly valuing benefits in a way that they can truly be brought into the decision-making process. So we're working on a value framework that will be used across the sector and hopefully beyond. Changes in policy and regulation. We're working directly with DEFRA, Ofwat, Environment Agency, Treasury, and Natural England, who are all on the policy and implementation board of the program, and so we can bring challenges directly to their attention. Identifying and driving a multi-million pound investment pipeline. So we're working with potential investors ranging from governmental organizations to smaller specialized investors to institutional investors on this. And then finally, wide dissemination and engagement. So it's the idea that everything we do is accessible for others and to learn together. Then the final slide is a journey that we envisage for the change. If you can move to the next slide. For the change process from where we, one back, from where we are now to the situation when nature-based solutions are mainstreamed. So starting with socializing the change, that's what we're doing now. We're setting up a collaboration framework, then motivating the change, so trying to create a cultural shift. So that comes with lots of engagement. Then easing the change, so we're developing tools and processes to value benefits, share risk, as well as ease funding and financing of nature-based solution. And then finally influencing the change to increase the confidence in the use and the performance of nature-based solutions, leading to greater adoption and regulatory support. So yeah, thank you. That was a very quick introduction, but I'm very happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Marieke. To be honest, it's already impressive. I can only imagine the amount of work that's gone into setting this up. So actually to then see your level of ambition about mainstreaming this, obviously no doubt we'll have to get you back in 2028, but thank you. It's really, really fascinating. So look forward to, I'm sure we'll get lots of questions on that later. So now I'm going to hand over to Michael, who is actually going to wear two hats for us today. And he's going to be sharing about RSPB's experience implementing both freshwater and marine and coastal nature-based solutions. So over to you, Michael.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to be here, real delight to be at the UN Global Compact. And yeah, I'm Michael Copleston. So I'm the RSPB England Director. What does that mean? Well, it means I oversee our delivery in England. So that could be anything from policy, engagement, projects, but it includes all of our nature reserves as well, which I'll come on to in a bit. But I've worked for about 20 years in the sector, and I've predominantly been working in creating nature reserves from scratch, actually. So I'm one of those people that I love birds, but I also quite like diggers because of all the work that we've done to create new habitats for nature, which is great. Now, that led to me working a little bit in different parts of the world. I predominantly worked with the minerals industry to create habitats, but it led to me working, for example, in China, just south of Shanghai, on some great nature-based solutions delivery on a huge scale at Chongming-Dongtan National Nature Reserve. And then that ultimately led to me speaking at COP26 in Glasgow, alongside a really brilliant international cast of NBS practitioners, alongside the Environment Agency, really trying to sort of talk through the track record and the confidence that needs to go with delivering nature-based solutions. So being asked to come here today, I was just delighted. So thank you. Really appreciate that. On to my next slide, please. So my next slide is more, in some respects, it's a starting point, because I think we've always got quite a lot of challenges to work through, and fundamentally we're always looking to see where we can find those economic, environmental and societal benefits, and at the moment we can really see that we've got some big conundrums to crack those. So I am going to give us a quick whistle-stop tour through some things that we've been delivering over this last decade or so, but it will come to the considerations of knowing that we've got lots of pressures around our coasts, and likewise the importance of what we do with our coastal environment and our marine environment, and indeed from our terrestrial areas, how we manage land, or what we do with that land and what it can contribute to society, particularly for us in terms of delivering resilient populations of key species and resilient habitats, but all the benefits that comes with that too. So on to the next slide, please. Now in RSPB England, I've got over 100 nature reserves, and they have significant scale at times, up to 5,000 hectares for Geltsdale, for example, in the uplands. Some incredibly famous and well-known places like Sherwood Forest, which is probably more known for Robin Hood than it is for the major oak, but it's got some of the largest collections of ancient oaks there. And then the slide that you can see at the moment has a picture of Wallasey Island, which is another example of an incredibly innovative and at-scale nature-based solution. And we cover around 65,000 hectares of important habitats, and thousands upon thousands of species rely upon those places. What I would say is that I'm currently very interested in our coast at the moment, as is our team, and it's the value and opportunities that we have. And for me, particularly looking at the East Coast Flyway, I saw some of the comments just coming through already about where people are coming from. And the reality is that we've got some significant major migratory routes for birds, for example. And one of those 7 key migratory routes is the East Coast Flyway. And really in the UK, this East Coast area is in many ways, we've got UK's one of its greatest assets. It's world-class mud. We've got some incredible estuaries, intertidal zones with a phenomenal amount of opportunity, but realistically they're packed with food, and we've got not just 100 or thousands or even tens of thousands. We've got literally millions of birds that are coming from places as far-flung as Siberia, down from across Europe and indeed from Africa. These are really important places for nature. And so trying to work out how we can design those spaces with nature in mind, whilst also considering the economic and societal benefits is really, really key. So that's where I come from and what I do and what I'm particularly interested in at the moment. Now, if I can go to the next slide. I've been asked to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of a few places, and one of them it's probably great to speak to is Medmary. So I think from an RSPB perspective, we've got a significant amount of coastal adaptation expertise from places like Wallasey, but Medmary was one of the very first. And being 10 years on from that delivery, we've got some really good examples now to be able to see how it's worked, but also look back at the delivery and understand how it came together. And what were the benefits. So I'm going to give you a very quick run through that, but it has been wonderful to be able to look back and see slides that were created more than 10 years ago now and bringing them back to life. It's a bit like going through your old family album, but we're going to talk about Medmary for a few minutes now. So next slide, please. So for those of you that don't know Medmary, we're looking at the very south coast of England. And at this point here, you can see on the left-hand side of that particular map, you'll be able to see that there is a space there. And if you can click forward on the slide, you'll be able to see a demonstration of some of the considerations there. So those red lines that work into the land there just demonstrates that through major flood events, the water from the coast, that open coast, was coming through to those spaces there. And the opportunity to look at a nature-based solution to address some of the impacts of flooding, particularly on businesses, local communities, and farmland was a really key opportunity there. Next slide, please. And just to show you that in real, if you like. So you've now got, again, if you can go through the clicks as well, what I'll just demonstrate to you, the area in blue there is the area at Medmary, which was originally flooding to a regular degree, but then the other circles highlight some of those other considerations. So you've got a holiday park, you've got villages and towns, you've got road networks, and you've got important farmland. And so there really needed to be a very integrated solution and a consideration of how working with the Environment Agency and the communities, the local stakeholders, what the opportunities might be. Next slide, please. So I like to sort of pause. Not only do I like birds and diggers, but I do like a graph as well. And I think one thing that's really important with nature-based solutions is to try and recognize what the drivers of change are at times. On the left-hand side, you can see a graph there which demonstrates the predicted, the forecasted, if you like, sea level impact that's going to occur over the 100 years ahead. And much of this is baked in, and this is recognizing the challenges that we face, if you like, from the climate crisis with regards to how much carbon dioxide there is in the atmosphere and the impacts that that will have for us. Now the map on the right is the same picture of that area, but it demonstrates two things. The purple zone is what would happen if there was no flood protection in that area, and the major floods occurred. Where would that water get to? And then the turquoise zone, which is just even in further extent of that, demonstrates what the impact 100 years from now with, modeled considerations of what sea level rise would look like, what the potential impacts would be there. So you can see some really stark drivers for needing to do something differently. Next slide, please. So if I can rewind to the challenge, I guess, the key thing here is that, well, how is it currently being managed? This is going right back to before we started the project. And what you can see there is a really interesting image, actually. So that is a shingle bank, and the shingle bank is all that the flood protection that was in place on the south coast that was providing protection to roads, houses, and a serious amount of infrastructure. And what you can see in the smaller image is how that was being managed on an annual basis. So in reality, fleets of diggers were being brought in on an annual basis to reshape the shingle beach, to try and lift it to a high point, which would then hold back storm surges and impacts from the coast. And that was to a degree of about £300,000 a year at least, maybe up to £500,000 a year. Now, in reality, the challenge there was the fact that the sea protection there was being breached on an annual basis. And so it wasn't really effective. And so there was an opportunity to look at these objectives and to see where a more sustainable flood risk management approach could be taken, and certainly where there might be then an opportunity to maximize some habitat creation, particularly looking at compensatory habitat, but then also for us to make sure that we got the right kinds of community participation as well. Next slide, please. So in brief, you'll see that there's a whole range of things that are involved from that point on. And, you know, the team down there working in collaboration, putting on exhibitions, guided walks. I've been in a similar situation. There's a lot of high-vis, hard hats, designs, a lot of work that goes into this. But effectively, you know, trying to tell the story of what you're going to do, why you've got to do it, but helping to bring the community on board with understanding the solutions is a really key part of our delivery down there. Next slide, please. And what you'll start to see here, again, these are very early. These are the images that were taken right from the beginning of the project, sort of demonstrating what the art of the possible was. If you can click forward, please, just to show a couple of extra lines. So realistically, the purple line there is to represent where some new levels of sea defense were being incorporated to allow that managed realignment, to allow that coastal change whereby the sea was allowed into certain areas, created new habitats, but also softened the impact of those storm surges and the impact that was being felt on an annual basis. And again, those red arrows are sort of like delineating where those impacts would be further felt if that wasn't there. Next slide, please. Again, just to make sure I have satisfied those that also like a digger. I mean, these are big engineering schemes, and I've worked on some significant ones with the RSPB, and again, working in partnership with experts, the landscape architects, the engineers, the role that the Environment Agency plays. I cannot underline that enough in these scenarios, but this is where the RSPB was able to bring together its project management and its experience of land management as well. And so there's a huge amount that goes into this, but these are some of the images that were live from the location. Next slide, please. And this really, you know, there's a huge amount of work that goes into this, but this is a nice aerial that demonstrates in some ways, the art of the possible. What you can see now there is where the open coast is being created, that managed realignment has occurred. You can see where the tidal sort of change is occurring. The sea is moving in through to the inland areas, creating new habitats. And it was an astonishing change, which was something that was a high success. The aerial images are great. We've got a wonderful array of footage as well. So there's footage on our YouTube websites. And interesting with MEDMRI that there's a huge amount. This is an IUCN gold standard NBS delivery. So it's been seen as one of the highest standards of delivery in accordance with both the community participation and the quality of the delivery. And I think if I can go to the next slide, I'll just walk you through a couple of key headlines. So I think for me, it is important when we look at nature-based solutions that you're really dealing with what was the original problem, the issue. And I think what we can see there is a cost of nearly £300,000 per year, but also a cost which wasn't effective, whereby the breach is almost on an annual basis. If you go back to prior to the work, a major storm in 2008 caused over £5 million of damage to local businesses, and some areas had to be evacuated. So it demonstrates the need there. And what the big numbers that are really interesting that tell the story of MEDMRI is that, there's the creation of significant hectares of intertidal salt marsh, really important, as we know, for carbon sequestration as now, and mudflat habitats, which are going to be really important for those migrating species that we talked about before. And this is all about enhancing about 3,000 hectares of a SSSI, so a site of special scientific interest, one of our most important places. Now, importantly, one of the things that was really interesting was that a major storm occurred in the year after us completing the sea breach and the creation of this scheme, a far bigger storm than the one that was occurred in 2008, and there was zero flood impacts in the local area. So it demonstrated that what occurred was a real success. Now, it's not to say that there'll be further challenges, I'm sure, in future, But what has been really clear is that the annual risk of flooding has been reduced from realistically 100% an annual breach down to 0.1, and the estimated saving on that is around £78 million per year, and that is really significant. So I think this is a really great demonstration. It's a great demonstration which is spoken to in many different ways. It's become a GCSE bite size in the UK, so it's something that can be used in schools to demonstrate nature-based solutions and adaptation, all the way through to really technical and high-quality pieces of work. ABPMR, for example, have got this as a case study on their website too. So a really good example, and 10 years on, we're really pleased with the results. And the last thing I'll say for this one, if that's okay, is what we do find is that when we're working with communities, is you can find that if you're talking in technical language, it's sometimes quite distant to being able to sort of realize what the vision is for a particular site. Now, the image on the side is something we've taken from Wallasey, but it's something we've repeated again and again for almost all of our nature-based solution projects, is where you can create those visual representations, those artistic illustrations, if you like, that help paint a picture of what it is that the outcomes are aiming for, and that makes a huge difference. So yeah, quite useful, hopefully. So now I'm going to go to another slide. I'm going to take you in another direction as we're going to go back into some freshwater considerations. So onto this next slide. So this is really exciting to be able to go from memory to wild horse water, and we're going from something which is an IUCN accredited nature-based solutions delivery to, again, one which is now an award-winning and a globally award-winning project in terms of our partnership delivery here with United Utilities. So I mean, this is a really comprehensive program of work at Wild Horse Water, which is up in Cumbria, and it's at landscape scale. I mean, fundamentally, we're looking at a site here, and the website is there, so you can pick up and again follow some of the videos and more insight. But I'll give you a brief insight to some of the key things around our delivery there. And really, I'll be talking through the fact that we've got rivers that have now been famously re-wiggled. We've got bogs and floodplains that have been re-wetted. We've got hay meadows that have been reflowered, woodlands and scrub being planted, and we've allowed to regenerate on previously overgrazed fell sides. So with a more sustainable and low intensity farming operation at its core, which has been good for the local community and the local economy as well, we've seen this demonstrate really where agriculture and ecological restoration can work together in harmony. So, and I think that's best exemplified that when we started working at Wild Horse Water, we were only employing 4 full-time staff a decade ago, and now we have 18 individuals that work there in a variety of roles, from scientists to local community work. And if I may, I would say also it's important to recognize, you know, these species that we're restoring and returning to some of these places are astonishing. So threatened species such as Atlantic salmon, which I'll come on to, red squirrels, tree pipits, you know, black grouse, a whole suite of Arctic alpine plants are increasing. Water voles have been successfully reintroduced, and indeed the rare marsh fritillary butterflies have recolonized as well. So it's a really exciting story here, and one of partnership, as you can see, with us and United Utilities in the Northwest. So next slide, please. So I can't talk about horse water without having a real strong reference to the brilliant Lee Schofield, who wrote a book called Wildfell. Lee still works in the Lake District. He works in partnership at a landscape scale, still with a great partnership delivery with RSPB, but with some of our partners in the area. And Lee was just a fantastic site manager, you know, truly inspirational, and all the work that he'd done over the last decade here led to the creation of Wildfell, a fantastic book. So for those of you that like nature writing, you'll see that this is a really well-received book, but really speaks to nature-based solutions and the restoration of habitats. So huge hats off to Lee, who you'll be able to find in a variety of videos as well, speaking to what we do there. Next slide, please. So this is some of the really important stuff. So the return of the salmon and a river re-wiggle is something that's really stood out for us, and it's a great story. The Ashton Award that we received in 2024 was a great surprise in many ways to have that global recognition. But I think in many ways it's seeing all those things that I just described, including, again, you know, tens of thousands of trees planted and delivering something in the heart of the Lake District where, you know, importantly, this is about improving drinking water, absorbing carbon, and increasing resilience to flooding. So there's really important ways that we can manage that land more effectively. But we've what you can see there is a before and after picture from the BBC, which shows the famous Swindale Beck, which has got some re-wiggling. And it may be a really, I think, standout feature for us, because this has been a really iconic story now. So not only does this improve, you know, water quality, and we can see that this particular catchment, Haweswater Reservoir, supplies about 2.2 million people across the northwest with their drinking water. But after 3 months of restoration and this work being completed, the picture on the right-hand side there, where you can start to see some of those gravel beds, so the lighter grey areas in the much more bendy and wiggly river. Well, after 3 months of restoration, salmon returned to spawn in the restored section of that river for the very first time in at least 150 years. And that's just an incredible achievement to have come through. And over 1,000 hectares of degraded peatlands have now been restored too, and about 50 kilometers of drains being blocked, and large areas of exposed peat being reprofiled and revegetated. So a really great story here of delivery. You'll be able to find much more of that on the Wild Haweswater website, including some videos which really talks through the vision all the way through to the further 35 years and the plans that we have ahead for Haweswater as well, which is to continue to deliver more in this space. So next slide, please. We're going to have one more segue from me, and I hope you can bear with. I'll only be at just another 2 minutes now, but I was just asked for something that was almost completely hot off the press in some respects. So the Blue Carbon Mapping Project, I think we have to really look at the terrestrial environment, the coastal environment, and the marine environment all together. We need to look at integrated solutions, and the Blue Carbon Mapping Project has been really fascinating. It's only been released in this last month. If you could go to the next slide, please. Feels like I'm on the news now, so going through a variety of stories, but this is great. I hope everyone can bear with me for just a little bit longer. So the Blue Carbon Mapping Project, it was released on the 19th, and it was undertaken by the Scottish Association for Marine Science, but it was on behalf of a really important partnership. Now, we often come together within the sector, and really important when we do. RSPB, WWF and the Wildlife Trust have all been involved in this. And this is quite a significant deal. So it's the first time that the carbon stores in the UK marine habitats have been mapped. And this will be, in many ways, quite a first globally as well, to have this level of consideration. And when we're talking about the UK marine habitats, we're talking about an area which is probably 3 times the size of the UK. So this is a significant area. And if you're able to follow the link on the side there, you can look at the full report, but also the technical summaries, the public-facing glossary, and again, some short videos which will help highlight some of the considerations. But the reason I thought I'd bring this into this conversation very briefly is because I think it's got some really interesting overview and insights. If you go to the next slide, please. So what you can see here is the main results is demonstrating that we've got about 250 million tons of organic carbon in the long-term stores across our UK seas. And what's fascinating about that, and again, when you go to the reports and you read through this, this will be really interesting. There are some slight differences with how you would treat organic carbon in consideration of how it interacts with the atmosphere compared to carbon in a terrestrial environment. But I think if we just take a moment to consider, well, what does 1 ton of carbon mean technically? Well, 1 ton of carbon, according to many sort of research and considerations, is the equivalent of 100 meat-based meals, or maybe the driving of a small petrol car for a whole year. So when we're talking about that as being 1 ton of carbon, the fact that there are nearly 250 million tons of carbon stored in the top 10 centimeters of the sediments of our seabeds, I think that really demonstrates that there is an important habitat for carbon storage. And for us to see that, yes, we've got a real punching above their weight consideration of what salt marshes and our seagrass beds can do, but it's really important to recognize that 98% of that total organic carbon is found in those sediments, that top 10 centimeters, really important. So next slide, please. So what does that mean? So the key takeaway here is quite important, and I won't go through all of this, but I think it just highlights the significance of that mud, that sublittoral sediment that we have there, and the need for us to have good protection for it. And you'd probably argue, well, we have marine protection zones, and we do, but these areas sometimes don't have, at the same time as having the paper protection, the actual management to ensure that we're not physically disturbing them. So for instance, some of those human activities such as bottom-towed fishing activity will disturb that top 10 centimeters. And I think that that's something we can really see maybe a great impact currently. So for us, we feel that this is a really important take-home moment to recognize that the UK, in terms of achieving its net zero and protecting 30% of its seas and land for nature, we've really got to keep looking hard. And this mapping exercise has been fantastic for us. So my last two slides now for you. Just as a final takeaway, you might find that in terms of in the business world, and particularly with regards to looking at the stories and bringing those stories to life, we've got from the Saving Our Wild Isles work that we did, the David Attenborough film that we ran last year, we produced in accordance with that some further films, and this is again the RSPB WWF, but with the National Trust. Now, I've put links onto all of these because you might find these fascinating, but there's to do with banking. I've specifically spoken to the Hungry for Change sessions with the Crown Estate, for example, where we ran a showing for those. These are 20-minute long films giving great insight from real experts from around the globe, but give some superb insight into the kind of, again, strategic challenges we face, the integrated solutions, and the need to act. So I thought these would be quite useful for everyone that's maybe on the call. So my last slide that I think is coming up, and it's a quick recap from this whistle-stop tour. If I was asked what my personal feelings are on delivery of nature-based solutions, for me, I think you have to work in partnership because you have to do them at scale. You have to look at some innovation because some of this is quite cutting edge, but we should have confidence that we've got a track record, we can do this. You've got to have communities absolutely at the heart of this because it's going to have impacts and it's got to be societal benefits. And I think importantly, the science is really key for us to have the evidence base. But as you've probably seen through how I've demonstrated with maybe some of the artistry work, some of the books that have been written, that you really need to win hearts and minds as well to go with the economic arguments. And really from that point there, you've then got confidence and ambition to drive ahead. And I think that hopefully is my takeaway from where we're at currently with nature-based solutions and hopefully some of those demonstrations of the art of the possible. So I think that's me. That's my last slide. Thank you ever so much for listening.
Thank you, Michael. That's been a fascinating tour from south to north with what was it? World-class mud, river wiggling, and tree pipits. We might have to give you your own channel, I think, at this rate. So thank you for that. That was fascinating. And so now I'm going to hand over to Samir, our final speaker, to share about how Ørsted is implementing and monitoring its marine nature-based solution interventions to deliver on its sustainability and commercial goals. Before I do, I just want to do a quick thank you for all the questions that you popped in. Please do carry on putting more questions in if you have them. And a special thank you to Duncan for starting us off. You are a legend. Thank you, Duncan. So now let's hear from Samir and then we'll get into our questions. So Samir, over to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So I'm just going to talk a little bit through a few examples of how we as an international renewables developer are approaching and implementing nature-based solutions at our operations as well as near our operations through partnerships. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of context about who we are a Danish energy company, energy developer. We're quite focused on offshore wind. So we're the largest developer of offshore wind globally. We have a pipeline of about now 10 gigawatts of installed capacity. Apologies, I should have updated this slide a little bit. But we also work in onshore renewables, bioenergy, and emerging technologies such as sustainable fuels. Next slide, please. We also, in 2021, released our biodiversity ambition, and our ambition is that all of the new renewable energy projects that we commission from 2030, so that is energy projects that start producing power from 2030 onwards, will deliver a net positive impact on biodiversity. So commissioned in 2030 means that a lot of those projects are in the development pipeline right now. And in terms of what net positive impact means, we follow international definitions. So in this case, I use a definition of what net positive impact means. So the totality of measures that we take to improve biodiversity exceeds all of the residual impacts that our project creates. And that is, I suppose, useful context for situating our work on nature-based solutions, which is on the next slide. So in order to do this, we have spent a lot of time looking back on our past projects and sort of grouping the different features that tend to interact with our offshore wind operations. So these are features that have the potential to be impacted by our projects, but also the features which sort of have potential opportunities for us to invest in to improve ecosystem condition. So obvious one is birds, and we're talking about shorebirds and seabirds for the marine context, intertidal habitats, fish, marine mammals, and then benthic habitats, and there's quite a range of those, but primarily I think we're talking about biogenic benthic reef in this case. Next slide, please. And what is the sort of rallying call, I suppose, for us? And it really is, I think, captured really well by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and this kind of idea that we almost have 10 years left. Like these are a crucial 10 years to really scale up the size and speed and sort of resource availability for these kinds of projects. And it's all about partnerships and again, partnerships to improve scale and improve resilience of these kinds of projects. Next slide, please. So that was part of the driver for us creating, together with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, the Wilder Humber Partnership. And this is really recognizing that coastal and estuarine habitats in the UK are incredibly important for a number of reasons. And a lot of those Michael already talked through, so I won't sort of dwell on that, but the sort of importance for coastal resilience, carbon, for example, and the fact that if you could just click through the slide, we've lost significant amounts of these habitats historically. So up to 95% of native oysters, 85% or more of salt marsh, and then greater than sort of 50%, probably likely quite a bit more than 50% of the seagrass, all really, really crucial habitats. But they're also very interconnected habitats. And so we saw a need to really design a project and a way of working that happened at a seascape scale. So it was looking at all of these habitats as an interconnected set. The next slide, please. So the project then, so the Wilder Humber project and the partnership focused at a particular site that is owned and run by the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust at Spurn Point, just on the north bank of the Humber estuary. And it's an area that historically had huge banks, up to 400 hectares of seagrass, but now has just a tiny fraction of that. It was also a sort of center point for historically extremely large oyster reefs, as well as salt marsh. So the idea was to make a start at this site and to look at how we could restore these habitats in an interconnected way. So to replant dwarf eelgrass, Zostera noltii, to bring back native oysters through trialing a number of different types of approaches, intertidally and subtidally, to work on improving the condition of salt marsh as a pilot, which we could then scale up, and similarly for sand dune. And the question there was, will this sort of combined restoration approach enhance the types of benefits and improve the speed and resilience of restoration in general? Next slide, please. Something else that we worked on also was considering the importance of, or the potential importance of seaweed aquaculture, or aquaculture in general, as a way to achieve biodiversity and carbon benefits that could be co-located with offshore wind in the future. So there was a number of open questions, of course. One of them was, what are the actual benefits of seaweed aquaculture? Can they be quantified? So this was a pilot project with an offshore seaweed cultivator on the Yorkshire coast to try out a bunch of different measurement methods to see if we could quantify this benefit. So we looked at direct assessments of biodiversity within the sediment, for example, under the seaweed farm. We looked at assessing the actual calculators themselves, and we trialed a whole bunch of different methodologies, including camera, hydrophone, eDNA, and sensors to collect a whole bunch of environmental data. So what this has allowed us to do is produce a guidance on how this kind of biodiversity could be monitored. And the results from the initial pilot were incredibly encouraging. What it has let us do, again, is to have a protocol to assess the actual biodiversity uplift, and that will be the second stage of this work. And the next slide, please. Something else, sorry, I know there's a lot of text on this slide, and you'll have these slides, so if you really want to read it, you can have a look at it later. But in my view, and from sort of what I can find, nature-inclusive design, which is broadly actions that are taken within the project design of an offshore wind farm to increase habitat for native species, is very, very similar to the definition for nature-based solutions, and indeed, I've read it being considered as a subset of broader nature-based solutions, which are obviously actions to protect and restore natural and modified systems to sort of address broader societal challenges. Now, nature-inclusive design is fast becoming a sort of central part of offshore wind deployment. We've been experimenting and carrying out pilots of different types of nature-inclusive design at a number of our wind farms. And these include improving habitat for particular predators like cod or shellfish, reintroducing or creating biogenic reef. And these are all sort of ongoing at the moment. And I've just put a link there if you're interested in seeing the full list. We also have sort of videos and more in-depth case studies of this deployment. You can find them on our website. The next slide, please. We've heard about the drivers already. I think this is mostly just reiterating a little bit of what's already been said, but from a company perspective, obviously we are looking at increasingly complex and prescriptive regulatory requirements around biodiversity. So it's not just about voluntary disclosure standards anymore. We are actually looking at mandatory corporate reporting directives in the EU, so CSRD. We are already seeing, obviously, biodiversity net gain requirements for our terrestrial TCPA small project applications, with the marine net gain likely coming in 2025 or 26. In other markets, we are seeing environmental offsets in Australia, similar sort of requirements in the US, and further on to come as well. There's obviously marine spatial planning regulation, which is kind of the starting point for offshore wind leasing in most markets. And then for our sort of internal corporate policy, we have our corporate biodiversity ambition, which is going to apply to all projects. The next bucket down is obviously broadly our social license to operate, social acceptability, and kind of benefit of energy projects in general, which flow partly from sort of legal permitting needs and requirements, but also from environmental considerations from the different stakeholders that we work with. And importantly, a piece under there is that we have a really big focus on partnerships and delivering these kinds of projects in partnership with local stakeholders who actually have a presence and sort of knowledge of the situation on the ground. And then finally, I think broader from a stakeholder perspective, we do align with international lending standards. So IFCPS 6 is kind of seen as the gold standard for institutional lender biodiversity safeguards. Reporting requirements, again, Task Force on Nature-Based Financial Disclosures, SBTN, bid criteria, again, different markets, but there are bid countries which have fairly prescriptive bid criteria and requirements around nature-inclusive design / nature-based solutions and biodiversity. I think an interesting trend that we're seeing now is sort of requests from corporate power purchase agreements that are looking for more kind of beyond compliance biodiversity performance within companies. And lastly, of course, investor requirements. All companies respond to this. I think, again, this is becoming increasingly complicated and very recently as well. So I am sort of seeing, even in the last 6 months, very quickly increasingly complex questions around biodiversity from investors, which you just never would have seen coming even last year. Next slide, please. So last time, just to end on some of the challenges, I think, firstly, just to say that measuring gains, measuring change in a dynamic marine ecosystem, incredibly complicated. And doing so at the sort of scale of a wind farm, even more so. So looking between sort of 200 and 400 square kilometers, trying to characterize, for example, benthic condition at that scale. There are very, very different stakeholder expectations in different markets. And this also sort of ties into aligning with the consent and regulatory landscape across all of the countries in which we operate. And then I think lastly, and crucially, is sort of understanding our current biodiversity footprint. And we do this all in the context of our global biodiversity ambition, where the goal is to have a measurable net positive impact. And one of the sort of key solutions is the development and implementation of nature-based solutions projects. I think that's the last one for me. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Lovely, thank you, Samir. And thank you for all the questions that you've all been putting in the chat. Please do feel free to, if you have any more, equally if you want to upvote. So now we've got quite a fascinating mix of questions in here, but the first one from Duncan actually does tie in quite nicely with what you were just talking about, Samir. So Duncan is asking, where do you see biodiversity net gain fitting into financial investment into NBS? Is it likely to be on a large enough scale to make a useful contribution, or is the majority of investment likely to come from elsewhere? Yeah, anybody want to have it, or anyone have a view on that one? I guess particularly thinking at Samir and Marieke, I don't know from your experiences.
Can start it off, and maybe yeah, no, it's definitely one of the areas where investment will come from, but it is, I guess, limited, and it's quite new and untested. So I don't think everyone will know the exact answers. But in the work that we've done for the mainstreaming nature-based solutions program, our partners North Star Transition have set out sort of the current state of play, or what is sort of happening at the moment. And so they've looked at sort of more a payment for ecosystem services, under which they have also biodiversity net gain and nutrient mitigation schemes and voluntary carbon markets. And then really looking at the other end is more sort of investment in nature-based solutions, and that can be done either by governments or by sort of more specialized or mid-scale investors, including impact investors, or by really the institutional investors like banks and pension funds. So what they're arguing is that it really needs to go to that more sort of investor group, and it will be a mix, and a lot of examples are currently a blended finance, but that to reach the scale that is needed, that we do need to move to that more sort of towards institutional investors. How to do that is still a bit of a challenge. I've also got the Nature Conservancy. They made an estimate for how much the biodiversity net gain market, or how much that could potentially finance, but that was in 2021, that report, so that might have changed as well. But anyway, that was like 100 million to 300 million, which is probably not enough.
Thanks, Marieke. Do you anybody want to come in, Samir or Michael?
Yeah, well, just a quick one. I think, I mean, if you look at the scale of investment in work like managed realignment, which again, a lot of that will be related to breaching seawalls, re-wetting salt marsh. The scale of that investment compared to a small number of biodiversity units that a developer might need are vastly different. So I think at a smaller scale, it certainly would help defray the costs to be able to resell biodiversity net gain credits from a particular development. But it is nothing compared to those much larger sort of partnership approaches.
Yeah.
And there's
So
a
more of
transaction
a
cost.
signal.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to mention the transaction cost of registering biodiversity net gain or registering a carbon project, and I think that's going to be quite a deterrent as well.
I think there'd be one more thing that I'd probably add, because I think Marieke is absolutely right. I think the estimates are still that government think that the market's probably at a size of around 100 to 200 million pounds per annum. Maybe that might lead to about 5,000 hectares of habitats that could be created. But I think what we've been looking at, and I think is the scale of opportunity, is that biodiversity net gain is designed for the housing market. It's designed more for buildings, if you like. And so the numbers of units that are required for that, as you say, Samir, is potentially quite different. I think where there might be an opportunity is to look at NSIPs, so to look at nationally strategic important projects, and seeing where things at scale likewise need strategically the delivery of nature-based solutions as well, and where you can combine those two. I think that's something which is probably important to continue to assess. But we recognise that the planning regulations are currently something that are being consulted on at the moment. So I think these are really important times to sort of recognise where is the investment that can come from conservation investment, if you like, to deliver these schemes.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Great, well, that's a good start. We've now got a question from Lizzie, specifically for you, Michael. Although, sure, if the others have views, you can also chip in. But Lizzie is asking, you mentioned that community participation was key. How do you ensure successful community participation in nature-based solution interventions? What kind of systems, governance structures do you need in place, and what kind of social factors should be taken into account when assessing the societal benefits? I feel like this is an essay question, Michael. Let's see if you can get an A.
I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's it's really well identified. I think we operate on many different schemes up and down the country, whereby we have to be clear about where we're coming into a project. If it's something that's already got a planning application, for example, that's in place with a partner, whether it's something that's still in the proposal stages. But I think there's a couple of key principles that I think are important. It's truly understanding the impacts that there are on the stakeholders that live within that vicinity, and to actually to listen and hear those. I think it's important not to present a fait accompli. I think it's important to sort of show genuine listening and flexibility to what those demands are. But I think it's also important to be clear on what the potential scope is, because I think that also helps to sort of direct things in the right direction, really, from the outset. So I think it's important to recognize that change is quite challenging, and there needs to be what we would probably term a just transition for those that are looking to cope with change, and to see where the opportunities are. So a lot of our work, and Medmarie, Freshwater, and others they're all good examples of it. But we do a huge amount of work whereby we run workshops, bring communities in, set out SWOT analysis, and understand, if you like, what their drivers are, and then see if we can work through to proposals that feel like they can have multiple benefits. And I think that is the key thing there. So yeah, I think it's really clear that not presenting a fait accompli is quite an essential component to that. Bringing them in at as earlier stage as possible is really, really important too. I think we all recognize that there are times when sometimes individual voices can be quite loud. And so it's making sure that you're facilitating it well, to know that those that maybe don't get heard as easily are also brought into the frame as well. So those are some of the experiences that I've even had personally with some of the schemes that I supported. But it's quite important. Some principles.
I'm going to give you an A for that. Well done, thank you. It's a really good point though, isn't it? Because I think it can be, often we, certainly there are a lot of, great energy companies that are actually, doing incredible work in just transition because of that, immediate impact in terms of the transition of roles. But there are so many learnings, I guess, across that. Does anybody else want to come in? Otherwise, we've got an anonymous question, but quite a fascinating one next. Marieke, do you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, no, it's a great, the previous one, it is a great question, because yeah, you always talk about all these great social benefits of nature-based solutions, but it's actually, yeah, if you then are also working on the ground with the stakeholders, it is quite difficult, but it is an opportunity. Yeah, it does deliver great opportunities for the people and that live around there. So sometimes there are good opportunities, and also for education. I think yeah, we've been working on a wetland, for example, and then school children were coming to learn and to help, and yeah, there's lots of ways, I guess, to engage. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, and that's all the more critical, isn't it? Being able to show some sort of here's one we made earlier, examples to show that end result. So, I mean, I'm gonna take from this anonymous question that you've all inspired someone career-wise, because we've got, and I think this might be one of the first times we've had a question on this kind of. So this is nice. We've got someone asking to develop a career/understanding of nature-based solutions with a focus on water or general. And what courses would you recommend people to do? Is a degree needed, or would you say there are short courses that give the knowledge needed to work in this area, pivoting from a more corporate sustainability background? I mean, obviously, there's always, I guess, an increasing interest in, for people transitioning to more sustainability roles. But yeah, any tips from any of you, from either, your own experiences or anything that you've seen going on within your areas around how do people get into nature-based solutions more specifically?
I've got a few things I can say about it. So first of all, so the whole skills topic was supposed to be part of what Innovation Fund project, the mainstreaming nature-based solutions one. And then we started to look at it, and it's so big that it's probably going to be taken forward as a project on its own. So it's definitely, yeah, there's a lot of gaps there, and a lot of ideas of where, what can be, what needs to be done. And I think especially, yeah, at the sort of more academic level, there is maybe, you can see more and more courses, more and more universities offering courses, and there's also short courses at, probably academic level, like there's a Cranfield course on nature-based solutions for land and water. That is quite popular, and there's also an Oxford University, the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative have a course that's much more sort of international and maybe less applied to the land and water solutions. It's broader, but especially that sort of the whole range of levels, because if you're and I'm quite interested to hear from the others what their experience is, because I work for a consultancy, so there's mostly academics that we need, but if you work with like the RSPB, then you'll have the whole range of skills that are needed, and you need people actually implementing the nature-based solution. So so we've been talking about it a lot, but there's a big need for more opportunities in that space.
Thanks, Marieke. Michael.
Yeah, no, I mean, great question again. Like it's so exciting. I think it's wonderful when you hear people are inspired or passionate about trying to find a way into to work in the space. So full disclosure, I guess. Like my training and background is firstly in psychology, actually. So I mean, you can kind of get to, my passion was always in wildlife, but I was really interested in people and psychology as well. But I was also very interested in geology and geography, and I've done a lot of work with different institutions to look at what are the right courses to get people on those first steps into conservation. I think many people, study marine biology, zoology, environmental-based courses, absolutely. But I would say that geography is a really interesting discipline, particularly around nature-based solutions, because I think you're looking at that human geography as well as the physical geography. And I think those things in an integrated way are quite useful. So right back to basics, if you like, of early subject matter that's quite helpful. But like Marieke, I think that project management is a really important skill set. So the ability to understand, what do you need to do, why do you do it, how are you going to do it, when are you going to do it, who's going to do it? Well, that coordinating skill is really, really important. Again, some great courses, wonderful institutions, Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, for example, and others. But technically, to deliver nature-based solutions, you may be a farmer, a landowner that's farming, and you might see an opportunity to do things differently, and absolutely it's about trying to unlock that. It might be that you're an engineer and you can see how that transition and that more blended approach between sort of grey and green opportunities is there. And again, ecologists are always going to be very interested in this space, but seeing where nature-based solutions can be delivered by understanding what it is, the benefits that you can get from working either with salt marshes or an ecosystem engineer like a beaver, for example, those things are always going to be there. But as is per the question earlier, communities are so important in this. So community development is really key too. So I think that you really can get that breadth. So there's an entry point at every level. I think I'm maybe even a living example of that. So coming from a psychology background to what I do now. So I think if you've got the real passion for it, I think you can find your way. But that would be my advice.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, now we're going to move to metrics, because we've got a couple of questions, and so I might group these together. So we've got Jackie asking, which biodiversity metrics would you recommend focusing on, especially within freshwater ecosystems where it's harder to contain within a defined area? And then similarly, Carol, which metrics are you using to quantify biodiversity impact to estimate the net positive effect? And Carol's said she's interested in the context of offshore wind. So, Samir, let me come to you first. I guess you're probably going to say, well, it depends, but yeah, what's your take on metrics for the purpose of these two questions?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a good one, and the freshwater and marine go well together here on that. So it's a bit of a complicated one as well. I think, well, obviously we know how biodiversity net gain and the DEFRA metric takes this from a sort of onshore habitat, terrestrial habitat perspective. So they basically use a habitat quality times area metric. This is quite a common approach, used in a number of countries, Australia, South Africa, and it's the basis for the DEFRA metric. So that is kind of the core of our measurement framework as far as habitats go. It becomes a bit different offshore though. So what we're basically looking at now in terms of our framework is 3 different levels, and it looks like marine net gain in the UK is probably going to follow a similar approach. So at the lowest level, you have your habitats and species. So thinking about species as an example, species abundance would be a very core metric. Thinking about habitat, habitat quality times area, so quality hectares would be an interesting, useful metric. The next level up, we're looking at sort of broader ecosystem function. So maybe thinking about the productivity of a habitat, of an area of marine or freshwater habitat. You might be looking at sort of indicators of primary productivity, concentration of chlorophyll, for example. And then at the sort of top level, we're looking at these kind of broader jurisdictional type targets and metrics. So I think you'd start getting into the whole area of natural capital there. You know, the sort of measurement of blue carbon, really interesting one, but you're really thinking about sort of massive scales there. I think the last thing I'll say there is the importance of having multiple indicators for each thing you're going to track, because very often you start trying to track something and you realize that that particular measurement approach just doesn't work.
Well, that's such a great tip. Thank you. Now I realise we've had a real little flurry of questions in, so I'm going to crack on. So we've got, we've now, so the next one we've got, so from Julia, asking for everyone, did you align with the UN Sustainable Development Goals to achieve these and to communicate internally and externally? And if so, how do you go about this? So I guess, yeah, has that been part of sort of any of the projects you've worked on? If not, we will, well, I say not move on, but we can certainly send you, Julia, to lots of materials that we have on how to incorporate SDGs. So, anybody?
I can say something. So within MacDonald, we have it, the UN sustainability goals. We've got it really integrated in our sort of system. So if you're working on a project, or if you're even starting with an opportunity, you need to indicate immediately what do you think will be the impact on which of the goals, and then throughout the project as we implement it, you need to sort of update that, so that is helpful. Yeah, and I think with these type of projects, it's you always manage to hit quite a few, so that's good.
Brilliant. And I'm very happy that we've got to this question from Neil, because I love this. To Michael, does a river leave a footprint of the original path to follow, or do you just re-wiggle it ad hoc? What a great question, Neil. I'm dying to know the answer.
It's great. I mean, so there's some great work that you can do. So a lot of people use LiDAR, for example, which is an imaging technique, like a satellite imaging technique, which shows you, when you take images from above, you can see, and you can also use magnetic resonance as well, but you can identify paleo channels. So paleo channels are these sort of like ancient roots of rivers at times, and you can see that in the land. You can almost read the landscape and identify where low spots are, or certainly where water seems to run in a different pattern post all of that change that's occurred through land use. And so identifying that original footprint is actually really important, because that can sometimes give you a great indicator of what you're looking to either restore. And so absolutely, that's a key part when we've created wetlands, say wet grassland habitats, all the way through to river restoration, is understanding the levels of the land. The LiDAR data, magnetic resonance, they've all been really helpful, but paleo channels are a really good clue, if you like, to the past, and can identify how you can recreate the future with that in mind. And it's helpful because I think that you can recharge using paleo channels, for example, and you can find that they have slightly different geological deposits to them as well. So because they may have historically had higher filtration rates, then you can get a different way that water interacts with them too. So yeah, you can really read the land in many different ways. It's quite interesting. It's a good question.
That is brilliant. Okay, and now we've got a question from Marieke from Diego, which is a really good one for us to get into. How are you driving collaboration? What processes or structures or incentives have you put in place to drive that collaboration? Because yes, I think there's no doubt about it. You've got some impressive levels of stakeholders and collaboration in your project. So yeah, anything you want to share on that, Marieke?
Yeah, sure. So within the project, we've got actually a sort of a work stream on collaboration, and with a lead and a small team around that. We're still in the phase where we're setting that really out what we are going to focus on. But I guess there's three sort of strands that that we've identified. So one is sort of really awareness raising and engagement and connecting and with people. And then the second one is, and that's, especially in the water sector, there's a huge focus on traditional sort of engineered solutions. So to disrupt that way of working and in the decision-making process, they're all designed for grey infrastructure, and really try to turn that on its head. And then finally, at the sort of highest level, policy and regulation that needs to be refined to really have those incentives to work together. So those are the three areas that we're working in.
Thanks, Marieke. Anybody else want to comment on that one? Because it's such a big topic. Okay, right. Well, let's move on to Lindsay, a topical question. I'd be interested on the panel's view on the recent government announcement on the creation of a floods resilience task force. There was no mention of NFM, natural flood management, in their announcement. What role do we expect this task force to help play in scaling and implementation of NBS? Michael, you got any thoughts?
No, yeah, I do, absolutely. I think no, I saw the announcement as well as many others have, and I met with Environment Agency just recently at Wallasey Island, actually, just to look at the demonstration of things at scale. That was with great confidence, actually, in the ability for us to look at future opportunities. So do I think a task force is? I think it absolutely is. I think there's many, as we talked about, the importance of stakeholders and communities. I think that it's recognizing within that task force there has been a long recognition. You know, even today in the news, we've seen that there's been 100 millilitres of rain in the space of 48 hours in central parts of England. We had maybe 2 to 3 months of flood events over the last year. We've got regularity of more extreme weather occurring. You know, whether it's the severe droughts, whether it's through the slightly more stormy and very, very wet periods as well. We're seeing it on our reserves, but we're seeing it along many parts of the country. So what does that tell me? That tells me that you've got a lot of landowners that are very concerned and want to be part of the process. So I think to be involved and engaged in that, and to see some of the groups that have been identified for that task force is a really positive thing. But your question is quite direct, and I think that I should answer it directly as well, which is, you know, should there be more recognition of natural flood management? Yes, I do. And I think that this is the interesting thing about nature-based solutions and natural flood management is, and it comes back to what I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, I think we have a track record of being able to deliver them, and we can see we've got global examples. We at RSPB have learnt hugely from traveling across the globe to see where the best practitioners are to deliver some of this work. And then likewise, we now have brilliant sort of return trips to sort of see where we've learned. So you're always passing the baton and learning in nature-based solutions. I think the challenge is that we still have more advocacy work, and we still have more need to continue to demonstrate with the case studies the certainties that needs to be there for the design of flood alleviation schemes, for example. So it is a challenge when you can see that, you know, engineers, for example, might be looking for certainty or confidence levels, and they find that the grey solutions have maybe got more evidence base that's worked up through formulas and equations and long-standing, if you like, implementation. I think it's important that we look hard at those regulations to understand whether there's better ways of creating a similar level of certainty, or understanding where there might be a different proportion of blend between the grey and the green solutions to see how they can work in conjunction with each other. But I think it's really important to see natural flood management. And again, we talk about these facts and these stats, but they are really, really powerful. If we look at the benefit of, say, for example, those intertidal zones, those salt marshes around the UK coastline, the attenuation that they offer, the reduction in flood height as a consequence of storm surges, for example, is significant. We're talking about taking maybe up to 40% of the heat out of the impacts there. So there's some really important things for us to try and build in, but we recognise that it is difficult on a scheme by scheme, case by case basis at times to build that level of certainty. So so I welcome, you know, I see the need for those task forces to be created, but I think we've got to do a really good job of making sure that we put the case forward and we build it much more into the established system to get a better blend for nature-based solutions.
Thanks, Michael. Do you want to come in on this one, Marieke?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that. I fully agree with what Michael's saying, and it's sometimes that yeah, people want nature-based solutions to do certain things that they maybe cannot. So with flooding, they are massive help, but they are more for sort of regular events that they really help. But maybe if you've got this extreme situation, then this extreme storm, like what we had yesterday, they're not that's not what they are best at. That's not where they, you can't prevent those things with nature-based solutions, but that does not mean that they do not work. And so that messaging around what they can and what they can't do, it's not that if they can't do certain things that they are useless. So yeah, I think the messaging is really important.
Thank you both. Probably just sneak one last question in, and I'm going to just, as we're touching on that, I think Jenny's, I'm just going to come to Jenny's question. So we've got a number on the same. How do you deal with dynamic processes and habitats in the marine environment? What happens if a storm damages or significantly changes what you've designed and installed? Do you attempt to return the design standard? Which I think is a really interesting point, as we're saying, we are increasingly doing all of these things in a more volatile, changing environment. So Samir, just come to you. Is that something you've come across in your sort of projects, and what's your take on that one before I close?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. And anyone, I think, putting together a project plan for anything marine or intertidal, this is always one of the biggest sort of concerns. And we've seen this with sort of our seagrass restoration work as well, where 5-10 years of restoration can be undone in a weekend, essentially. So I think really, if there's one sort of message there, it is that really resilience is all about scale in marine, and it's about doing these things in the biggest, most connected way possible. And that's how these habitats used to exist before they got fragmented. And really, that's the sort of central issue.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Well, on that note, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my speakers. Michael, Marieke, Samir, you've shared a huge amount of examples and lots of insights, so thank you very much for that. Thank you, as always, to our wonderful audience for all of your engagement in the chat and some amazing questions. Thank you, One Carbon World, for your support in enabling us to have this series. And so would also like to flag that when we finish this session, there will be a feedback survey that will come up. We would love you to fill that in to give us some feedback. So to close, we've got a few more engagement opportunities coming up. This is the third of 4 webinars, so please sign up for the final session, which is going to be all about exploring how the private sector can contribute towards bridging that finance gap so that nature-based solutions can be deployed at scale. And we're going to look at some of the factors that investors can take into account when assessing the bankability of nature-based solution interventions. We've got a great lineup of speakers from UNET FI, WWF UK and Aviva Investors, and that is on the 8th of October. So there should be a link in the chat. We also have plenty more opportunities for engagement with the UN Global Compact Network UK outside of this. We have our annual summit coming up on the 1st of October, which is back next week, which will be held at the London Guildhall. The theme this year is Bridging the Ambition to Action Gap, which will be tackling through a range of panel discussions, fireside chats, workshops, and networking. So to view the agenda and register to attend virtually for free via the live stream, then please click on the link. We have got a 3-part addressing energy-related emissions webinar series, and we have the final session also next week on the 3rd of October, which is going to deep dive into power purchase agreements and also look at the wider energy policy landscape with guest speakers from the new National Energy System Operator. We've got DLA Piper to give a legal perspective, Nestlé to give the manufacturing perspective, Scottish Power Renewables. And finally, We are running a series of interactive webinars to help equip SMEs in our network with knowledge and tools to advance social sustainability within their operations and supply chain. The first session of this 7-part series will kick off in October. And if you're a member of UN Global Compact Network UK, you can register. So I'm sorry, I've just gone over 1 minute slightly, but thank you everyone for joining. We hope we see you at our next session, and have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you. Goodbye.